Hello, I'm Joan Capurro, and it's my pleasure to host this segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame show. It's hard to imagine Marin County without the work of countless women shaping the life, culture, mores, and landscape of Marin County. From a Frank Lloyd Wright designed civic center to high-quality public schools, artworks downtown in San Rafael, vast areas of open space, innovative businesses, and a robust network of nonprofits, women have put their mark on Marin County. And Marin's women's contributions go beyond our county. Honorees have been in space, to the Arctic, created social changing films, served in the U.S. Senate, and helped integrate holistic medicine and Western medical practices. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted over 125 Marin women of distinction, and today it's my pleasure to introduce Nancy Nakai, who was inducted in 2013 for her work as a founder. Welcome, Nancy. That's great. It's great to meet the founders. So I have some questions for you.
Okay.
Where did life start for you, and what were some of your early influences?
Life started for me, I was born in Rochester, New York, which is a city located on Lake Ontario. And I was immediately transported as a young baby to the suburb of Webster, New York. It was a wonderful, tiny town that was a typical post-World War II community, and it was an idyllic
Seen those on TV.
Yes.
Idyllic childhood. Good for you. Well, jumping way far ahead here, in 1987, you co-founded the Marin Women's Hall of Fame. So how did the Hall of Fame first come into existence? How did that happen?
There were a group of us at a luncheon conference for the Marin Women's Services Coalition, which was a loosely based organization of women executive directors of nonprofits in the county. And we had a guest speaker during the lunch hour, and she talked about how they had just finished honoring women in Santa Clara County. And she talked about how rewarding it was for the people that were being honored at this luncheon. It was like a bell went off among the group of us that were sitting at this one table, and we decided to stay after that meeting, and we decided that this was an idea whose time had come in Marin, because in the course of our work in Marin, we had met far too many women who went, either left the county or they passed on without ever having been thanked, without ever having their work documented. And we said, this cannot continue. So we decided that we would create, within 1 month, we had a steering committee, we had a founding vision established, we had...
It's amazing.
I
but I'm not surprised.
I told them that my involvement was going to be contingent on creating a historic record. So I wanted to make sure that every honoree had a biography written, and that if possible, we would videotape the honorees.
And you did.
And here I am. So this has come full circle for me.
That's
so it's
great.
A pleasure to be here.
It's amazing how when some women get together, what you can do, the powerful things you can do when you're driven to recognize others.
And we were driven.
Yes.
We were driven.
Oh, I know. 1 month. Unbelievable. Well, in 1988, the first year Marin women were inducted into the Marin Women's Hall of Fame. Tell our viewers about the nomination selection process for the first year.
Okay. We had to set up what a selection criteria would be. And so we had to determine what was it that the women whom we knew of and whom we had known about had in common. And what did we want to know more about them? And they had to have some kind of a common thread. So it seemed like they had distinguished themselves, that they had often had to overcome obstacles, that they were perseverant, that they created allies. And we wanted to know, so we made those things that we wanted to have honored. Because often women who were achieving things were cast aside.
Right.
Very sadly. And so we wanted to make sure that that was part of the selection process. Once we established the selection criteria, we knew we had to get the word out. So everybody that all of us knew and all the organizations that we had contact with, we asked them to give us a list of names of people who might be interested in serving on a nominating committee. So we actually had designated nominators, and we had a nominations committee kickoff, and we had about 20 people show up. And we were thrilled, and we knew other people that were interested in nominating, and when the nominations came in that very first November, that was the deadline, we were delighted. We had dozens and dozens of nominations, and we knew that this was an idea whose time had come.
Yes.
And if anything, it was very difficult for the selection committee. We said, make it 5, and they just refused. We ended up with 8 honorees that first year, which was wonderful, but it created an immediate backlog in all of the biographical work we were doing.
Right.
But it was a problem that was lovely to have.
It makes the celebration. I remember hearing about that. I remember the excitement. I wasn't part of it. I was working at that time in a bank, and there was a furor, if you will. I was amazed. So I can so relate to that one. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And you had 8, and then we tried to have like 5 or 4, which is what they're trying to do now.
Right. Then we went to 7, and we were still way behind. And then we said, absolutely hard and fast, 5, no more than that. And we would prefer that one be a posthumous, because we knew there was such a backlog of wonderful women that needed to have their contributions documented. So we went with the one posthumous each year.
And we have that now, which is fabulous.
Yes.
You know, looking back on the first quarter century of Marin Women's Hall of Fame, what are you most proud of, personally? I mean, you've already told me some that I'm proud of for you, but...
I think that we did have an opportunity to thank people. There were so many people, honorees, that died within months of being honored. There were others that were ill. I remember Mimi Farina was not feeling well, and shortly thereafter she was diagnosed with cancer. And then she was gone within about a year, I think. And the fact that they knew that somebody was watching and somebody was thankful was huge. And so I think I am most grateful for the effect that it's had on the honorees' lives. Personally, I have to say that the original selection committees were wonderful, that they donated so much time. So I was grateful and inspired by the buy-in. The selection process takes hours and hours and hours. And the steering committee, that original group of 6, that we had to recruit others to join us because the workload got so big so fast.
Sure.
But I must say that for the first decade or so, those steering committee meetings were a hoot. We got along famously. We had fun. We were inspired. It wasn't work. It was hours and hours and hours of work, but it just happened.
But it was work that was a passion for each of you
It really
to
was.
recognize.
Yes.
Because it's just so right.
Yeah.
Well, that's fabulous to be a part of the co-founders. And like I say, I was from a distance on all of that, but I really could sense it just by the way other women would talk and talk about it. So you sparked something that I'm so glad is here today.
I am too.
And it's been a long time. So women have made significant progress since the 1980s when the Hall of Fame was established. Why is the Hall of Fame relevant today?
Because women are still making a contribution.
Yes, that was a silly question.
We were told the very first year when we were looking for nominations, and people, a couple said, "You're going to run out of women within 2 years." And we knew just from the own people that in our lives that we had come across and people that they knew, women that had retired here, women that had used Marin as a home base, historical figures from Marin. We knew that there was a huge story to tell. And when we were soliciting nominations, we made an effort to dig into history, to dig into every corner. And for people, if they didn't know somebody personally, maybe they had heard about somebody and could recruit somebody to do a nomination. We called those the hidden women of Marin. And that's where we got honorees like Helen Nelson, who was the first consumer advocate in the United States. She and Ralph Nader.
Who would have known otherwise?
And who would have known? And yet she used Mill Valley as a base.
Right.
So, and she had lived here all her life. But she had done most of her work in Geneva, Switzerland, or in New York, or in Washington. So
a lot of wonderful women that you don't
Yes,
know about here.
a lot.
And you're right. Somebody made a comment a couple of years ago that do we think we're going to run out of women? I said, I don't even know how you can ask that question. How could you possibly? Because a lot of women who are outside, live here, or were born here, have done great things. So.
Absolutely.
Well, it's I just think it's fabulous that you helped start that. I mean, it's so important, and I've been watching it for all these years. Now it's exciting to be part of it. So, your husband Paul is of Japanese descent. Can you speak a little bit about the experience of being part of a multicultural family?
Well, I met my husband while I was in my last semester at Syracuse University. He was finishing up his master's thesis, and I was trying to put together money to pay for graduate school. So we ended up working at the same country club. And I was carrying 21 credit hours, and I was working 35 hours a week. And he was equally taxed with his thesis research, and he was also working about 35 hours a week. We had never met while at school, because Syracuse is a pretty big school. But we came across each other at this country club and met, and within a year we were married. So
you're both driven and you're both very hard workers.
Yes.
You know, that's a good match.
Yeah, we were a good match, and temperamentally we were a good match. He got word right before he had his thesis approved that his father was terminally ill with cancer.
Oh.
So instead of proceeding to graduate school in Boston, for me, all plans were put on hold, and we went to Hawaii. Okay. And so, and I met the most wonderful man. My father-in-law was a veteran of the famous Japanese-American regiment that fought in World War II, the one that was so highly decorated, the one that Senator Daniel Inouye was a member of. Well, my father-in-law was a member of that same unit, and he had been fighting in Italy, and an 88 millimeter German shell landed in front of him, and so he was blinded and was deaf in one ear. So I not only was a member of a multicultural family, I was a member of a family with a severely disabled family member. Wow. But meeting Kyoto Nakai, had a profound effect on me in terms of resilience and patience and perseverance.
To see somebody go forward and live their life.
Right. And to see, you know, he was so pleased that Paul had succeeded so well at school, had gotten a full scholarship to Syracuse and had done so well, and then had gotten had 4.0 and got a full scholarship for his master's degree. So, you know, Kyoto was understandably very proud, and he welcomed me into the family with open arms. Not every member of Paul's family did.
That happens in a lot of families.
That happens in a lot of families, yeah. I think that, you know, some of them
That's,
looked across the dinner table at me, and I was a little different. But it is something that we have had to deal with throughout our married life. We've been married almost 42 years now.
Good for you.
So it's sometimes it's a little surprising that things still happen, comments are still made, and I say, gee, what year is this really? It was much more prevalent when we were first married in 1972, but the fact that it persists is a little
That's strange.
strange.
It's come so far.
Yeah, but not so in other ways.
No, that's for sure. And in that sense, another question I have, I've heard you say you hit 3 changes in consciousness of discrimination in your life. So tell us a little bit about that. You've started it. Let's hear a little more about that.
Well, you know, I did grow up in a very homogenous community in Webster, New York, and never thought that violence against women was a reality, because it certainly wasn't on my eyeballs when I graduated from high school. When I went away to college, within my first semester, there was a girl in my dorm who had been what the term would now be called date raped. And there was no place for her to go. There was no rape crisis center. There was no real sensitive, you know, it was like, well, you were on a date, what did you expect? Oh. And that was shocking. And there would be other instances. You know, this was the miniskirt era in 1968, 69. And that, you know, you could be groped at any time. And it was like, well, of course you're wearing a miniskirt, but there was nothing else for sale. And at the school, to go to school functions, you were not allowed to wear pants yet.
Right, I remember that.
They did not remove the dress code for women until my sophomore year at college. So here you were in a miniskirt, and I guess you were fair game. And if you were on a date and you got raped, you were fair game. And we knew, I knew of people, again, in my dorm and people on my dorm floor. Some people got pregnant, and there was no option other than an illegal abortion or to have the child. And it put some people in some pretty tough circumstances. I knew of some people that ended up with back alley abortions, pretty badly injured.
Terrible.
Terrible. And so the fact that these things could happen, the date rape and sometimes pregnancies from that, and then there was no option, it was scary. It was scary because it was like the only position women had was as victims.
Right.
There seemed to be nothing. The women's movement had not yet really come to the fore. I was beginning to hear rumblings of it, but most of the shouting on campus was about the Vietnam movement and the civil rights movement. It hadn't quite filtered to women yet, not by the time I graduated.
No, and they just took the blame for everything. It's as though everything was their fault.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of these people were made to feel that it was their fault. A lot of women just dropped out of college.
Right.
It just was a life changer. Some people depressed, suicide attempts. It was bad.
Thanks. Thank goodness for the women's movement.
Right, and Syracuse was not a terrible place, but I'm sure this happened on every single college campus. I'm sure it happened in every single city, but it was a shock to me to see women victimized like that, and there was no place for them to go except to talk to other girls on the dorm floor who were scared.
Right. So it's even hard to believe that it's in our lifetime, right? Because we've come a long way, and we've got a bit more to go, I would say.
Yes, I agree.
You earned a master's in American history with a concentration in the women from the University of Hawaii. So how did that develop?
Well, I graduated from Syracuse. I took a lot of public policy classes and audited a lot of public policy classes at the Maxwell School at Syracuse, but my major was in history and in American history. So when I was a freshly minted graduate with all these credit hours, and I had taken a lot of graduate school classes at Syracuse, and then I entered the workforce, and my shock, my second consciousness, was that in Hawaii at the time, there were one place you could get a job, and that was in the papers by reading the classifieds. And the Honolulu Star Bulletin had male wanted and female wanted. and the male wanted was all of the professional jobs, and there was nothing in the female wanted except either paid escorts for Waikiki tourists or clerical.
Oh my goodness.
And so I am sitting there with a degree, and I got a briefcase, and I have a suit, and I'm ready to go interview, and I'm just being asked how fast I could type. And I had a resume, and people looked at me like I had two heads, that I was a woman with a resume. I sent out a couple of resumes with just N.A. Nakai. I did not indicate that I was female, and I got in the door, but then they said, oh, I'm sorry, we do not hire women for this.
Can't even talk that way today.
Yeah, you can't. Well, but back then they could. And so it was a shock.
Yeah.
So it was a shock, and there was no place really to take that shock. I could talk to my husband about it, but he didn't know what to do about it. So he encouraged me to just keep trying. Ms. Magazine, I came across a Ms. Magazine over in Honolulu, Hawaii, and that was my lifeline, because I realized that I was not nuts, and that there was a problem of employment discrimination, there was a problem of women being raped, there was a problem of women being beaten in the home. So Ms. Magazine was my sanity. I realized that I would have to deal with what was on the ground in Hawaii, but I would have to try and do as best I could in the circumstances I had. And I slowly, over the years, carved out a bit of a more professional career other than being a clerk. But while I was doing that, I decided to enroll at the University of Hawaii to get my master's in history with the thought of becoming a history professor.
Uh-huh.
So I entered their master's degree program and took classes at night for many years. And I came across a professor who said, what is it that you want to specialize in? And I told her I wanted to get a master's degree in women's history, because all my years at Syracuse, it was never an issue, and it was not even thought of as a worthy subject.
Goodness.
I had all those years at the Maxwell School, and very little was ever said about women in history. And I realized that after reading Ms. Magazine. So thank you, Gloria Steinem.
I thought you were going to tell me you went to work for Ms. Magazine.
No, but I'm sad that it stopped publication.
Yes, for sure.
But this professor said, I will do that. It'll have to be in American history, but your concentration will be in the history of women. I did a lot through independent study, and I ended up writing my master's thesis on a woman who had been mentored by Susan B. Anthony for most of her adult life, the Reverend Dr. Anna Howard Shaw. Oh. And I was delighted to get her life story down in print, and it was the beginning, obviously, of a lifelong passion, because here we are.
But good for you. You're an advocate of women, and you were all by yourself doing some of that, it sounds like.
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Well, you said something about Susan. Tell us a little bit about Aunt Susan's day in Marin.
When I was working as a consultant to the Marin Women's Commission, back then it was the Commission on the Status of Women, they asked me to do research on local women's history to perhaps create a curriculum unit for local middle schools for Women's History Week. Back then it was Women's History Week. So I did do some research, and I started to go farther and farther back on my own time, and I came across a little article on microfiche from the at the Frank Lloyd Wright Library, in the Antique Kent room, and of course Antique Kent is also an honoree. Right. So I was in the Antique Kent room looking at microfiche and came across an article that Susan B. Anthony had spent some time here in Marin campaigning in 1896 during the first California initiative for a statewide suffrage amendment. And it turned out that she used San Francisco as her home base, and then she traveled up and down the state for almost a full year. Now, she was she must have been in her 70s at this point. I don't know how she kept up the pace she did.
Amazing.
But she was recognized by her support group. They called her Aunt Susan. And they were quite concerned that she was walking exhausted, and they wanted her to just have fun for a day. but she was so determined. She would not have fun for a day unless there was a campaign speech connected to it. So she came over on the ferry in September of 1896. She stayed at someone's house. I have to find out which that Marin Women's House was, or who that was. And she spoke that night in San Rafael at a rally, and was shouted down by some men who were against women getting the vote, and she handled herself very well. She was attacked somewhat in the article talking about women wanting the vote and why did they need the vote and all that. But the very next day, this group took her up on the Mount Tam Scenic Railway, the Gravity Railway.
Yes.
And she had a day off up on Mount Tam, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. Of course, once she got to the top, she organized some of the tourists that were up there, and she gave a speech.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Before she rode back down again. If there was a way that we could make her an honorary member of the Hall of Fame, because she lived here for one day, but I don't think she quite qualifies. But
I don't know. Oh, right. She lived here for one day.
Yeah.
But who she is would qualify her, I would think. And that's
so
a fabulous story.
So Aunt Susan spent one day here in Marin.
Did you get some of the information out of the IJ? Because the Marin History Museum has the IJ papers from the early 1800s, or late 1800s.
I got this through the auspices of the Civic Center Library, and just reeled through. I have worked with the Marin History Museum to do research on I nominated Louise Boyd.
Oh, yes.
And I nominated Elizabeth Thatcher Kent, who, of course, are two posthumous honorees. And there was material then there for them,
Well, that's good. Well, this has been wonderful. I've learned so much about you. We all have. And I just appreciate knowing the history about you doing what you did for women and going out on your own and just doing it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for sharing your incredible life. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. The Marin Women's Hall of Fame is a project of the YWCA of San Francisco and Marin. If you would like to learn more about the Hall of Fame and our honorees, please visit www.ywcasf-marin.org. Thank you, Nancy. That was wonderful. Wonderful.